Hello. It's been, I think, just over a year since I did one of these uh, kind of video dissections of my images, and I thought I'd take some time and go over some recent photographs from an event I discussed in a previous video just over a year ago. These were taken this year, 2022, during the autumn equinox at Primrose Hill. I'll be going through some of these photographs and discussing, um, you know, uh, what they show, why I took them the way I did, and I've actually, uh, in the time over the past year since the last time I documented this, and since photographing the summer equinox at Stonehenge as well, I've kind of formed a better idea of where this story is actually going, which means that the images I took here are more informed by that than just photographing the event for the sake of the event. Um, so these images were taken midday on the equinox, Primrose Hill. This first one is during they do kind of a like a rehearsal session beforehand before the ceremony itself. So we've got it's like a talcum powder being applied to the floor where people almost like actors to stand on their mark, to step to their mark. So the different points of the compass, north, south, west, and east, know where to be standing when the ceremony begins. I was photographing this day with two bodies, two film cameras, one of which I was intending to use a longer lens, the other which I was using a wide 24mm. This was taken with the long lens. However, shortly after making this image and the ones you're about to see, I reached the end of my roll and it snapped off inside the camera, which meant that I wasn't able to continue using that. This was quite frustrating on the day, but I was able to do the rest on 24mm. So I'll show you the point at which that happens, and then I'll discuss some of the effects that had on the images themselves. This is kind of a snapshot. I was waiting for it to begin. I was watching the rehearsal, but I wasn't really photographing this aspect as seriously. This next image is again that the druids will step forward, they'll outstretch their arms, and they will perform their blessing towards the direction of the four directions of the compass point. The top of Primrose Hill is actually really interesting. It has the compass north, south, west, and east marked out, along with a quote and along with a kind of bronze metal seal in the center of a famous druid whose name escapes me at the moment. But the location has been used for many years to perform this same ritual. This photograph is from a slightly different angle. I moved around them. You can see I'm standing somewhere over here. So I move around so I can photograph them against the white sky. And then I'm just gonna, I've put these in order so I can jump forward to show this is the rehearsal. And then this is them, in uniform, wearing their robes, performing the ritual itself. And this is just the rehearsal. So you can see by attending the rehearsal, I also had a good idea of where to be so I could photograph the thing itself. Not too happy with all this negative space up here, but I think the actual, the iconography of this is pretty effective. The film I'm using is a quite deeply expired Ilford Delta 400, which is why it's so grainy. You can see it's very grainy, but I think it quite works for these because you've got these bright white robes against a bright white sky, and without having the more in shadow, it would be quite difficult to make out. So I think the age of the film helps to actually see what's going on in the first place. Just jumping back, this is again during the prep. I quite liked this kind of bicycle in the foreground, and then the druids in the background. It shows that some of them have brought their kids. There's this plastic sheet hanging here, which contains the robes. So I think this is just a nice kind of introductory image. for this, and you can see this is quite a bit wider than the long lens I was working with. I think it's at this point that I'd switched, so I'm entirely just using 24mm to photograph from here on in. You won't see other long images unless, I think there may be a few, but we'll get to that. But anyway, I decided to make do with 24mm, and this is you know, one of the results of that. I'm trying to work to document less than one thing at a time. With this, I've got, you know, one clear subject here. There are layers either side from the shoulders of the druids who are in front of me, between me and the main people here, but it's still not the same as how much context you can include with something wider with 24mm. Sorry, I've got this zoom display box in my way, which is preventing me from loading up the rest of the images. I'm just going to move this down here. So yeah, from there they start to queue up. I'm really happy with the layers with this. I'm not too happy with that you lose the detail of the dog's nose in the bottom corner here. But again, 24mm, you've got one here, the line here, you've got the sword here, which is again very clear, clear black element against the white, and then you've got the dog here in the foreground. You've got the background, so you can see the urban setting it's in, but it's still mostly in nature. But because of the age of the film, you can see that, you know, you're losing a lot of detail, especially in the black here. There's not really a lot going on here. You get some leaves, but it's mainly just white against black. I quite like the leaves on the floor. That's very kind of autumnal and a nice detail in the foreground. But I think this is probably the strongest image I shot that day, and I'm really happy that I was able to use 24mm so effectively. It's not usually a focal length that I can, you know, create something like this with this amount of dynamicism. I'm usually using it much closer and making more compromises as a result. This is the procession on the way up to the hill. I think it's again on 24mm. I'm mostly staying on the same device. You can actually, what I'll do is I'll link in the description of this video my video from last year, 2021, where I photographed the same ceremony, and you compare some of the images and the decisions I was making there with the decisions I'm making here, especially because I'm shooting with such a different lens. I quite like that just underneath the crook, you've got the shard here, which is an element I'm trying to include because it's quite visible nicely from this vantage point. So there are a few images where I really try and emphasize this modern backdrop to the kind of classic ritual taking place. But the fact that it's aligned here is purely by chance. I'm just kind of walking with them and photographing where I can. This is, I switch during the ceremony from 24 to a longer lens. So I'm trying to again bring in this very modern, the BT tower set against the ritual going on here. This image I try to expose because you've got the sunlight coming right through, so you can see the outline of the druid beneath his robe, which is quite a nice kind of surreal, almost like plastic wrap effect, which I quite like. And I think this was also with the longer lens, not the 24. You can kind of tell from the perspective and the fall off in the background that he is the subject, and it's not about interactions with the layers. It's just about the detail of the light coming through that robe. This is a moment where I photographed it in the last one with a longer lens. This is the result with a wider lens. I think I prefer this result. The swords, again, very stark black on white against the background, foreground elements of the robed figures in the foreground. You've got the nice selection of druids, and then one person who I think is just an onlooker here, which is kind of nice for contextual to show that it's not just druids here. You know, there's other people observing and being part of the events. I remember that last year I photographed the same moment as he draws the sword to ask for peace before the ceremony begins. Because I was using a longer lens, then I was much closer in on this, and I didn't include so much, you know, negative space and context. But I think because I'm using the wide lens, I remembered to drop down, so I would get the sword against the sky, framed through these people, and I think it's a much more dramatic image. I think it's a lot more, you're peering through these people rather than just kind of looking at a flat plane. There's a bit more depth, there's a bit more energy. So I definitely prefer this iteration of the scene. This I'm really happy with. Again, you've got this modern backdrop, all the modern buildings, including the Shard here. You've got them going downhill. This is after the ceremony's concluded. They're on their way down. And I think, again, the age of the film really helps with the ambience. You've got all this grain in the sky. So it's really, not badly defined, but less detailed than if it was a crystal clear image. But I think it goes a long way to help with the mood of the image. And then because you don't have a lot of detail in the grays down here, it's pure, white and gray against just black, but still with enough detail to have these modern buildings which are just above all of their heads, and then the clouds on top fully. And then this photograph is longer lens, again with last year's iteration of this moment. You can actually see that I shot it with the wider lens, the 24, and had a lot more detail. This time I chose to go for a lot tighter of an angle. Again, it's very grainy, but because I'm so close, you get a lot of detail. And this is the moment just as the hands come apart from being held, and I'm quite happy that it's got, the interaction, but not quite touching. Just enough detail in the whites and the grays of the robe, the folds, just enough detail in the background so you can see the banners, the staff. Nothing too intricate or complicated about this image. Again, it's pure light gray against black, no detail in the black because of the very old film I was using. But I really quite like the effect of this image, and I prefer this for a kind of detail shot, detailed despite the lack of actual detail in the grain. I think it's very effective. I still think that, where is it? This image is the strongest one from this year and will definitely have a place in the project. Now that I've, I think this was my third time photographing the Primrose Hill equinox. I've also spent time at there's the spring equinox at Tower Hill, and then there's the summer and winter equinoxes, which are at Stonehenge. There are also autumn and spring equinoxes at Stonehenge, but I haven't been yet. I'll probably do winter this year, hopefully, and I'll be creating something from this kind of cycle of the seasons against the very traditional classic backdrop of Druidic ritual. I think that with that idea in mind, these images, have a much clearer place with the modern fashion turning into Druidic robes, with the icons of kind of modern living and youth against this kind of ancient practice. Yeah, I'm hoping to spend at least the next few years building up an archive of these images, and then hopefully I'll have something to show for it. But I think this was a good a good next step. And again, I'm going to link the 2021 video I made about photographing this same event, so that you can compare some of the photographs I made this time around to some of the ones I made last time around. You can compare, when I chose to use wider angle lenses, when I chose to use longer lenses, how that affected the images, and how these compositions ultimately come together to tell the story.